The Tale of Tsar Saltan and of his son, the Tsarevich Gidon, by Alexander Pushkin. Once upon a time, 3 girls sat spinning by the window of their home. "If I was Arina," said one of them, who enjoyed cooking, "I would make a feast for the whole world and his wife." "If I was Arina," said the second, who was a skilled weaver, "I'd weave linen cloth for them." But the youngest said, "If I was Arina, I would want to bear the Tsar a son who was a hero." Scarcely had she said this when the door opened, and the Tsar himself came into the room. He had been listening outside the shuttered window, and what the third sister had said had much moved him. "Fair maiden," he said, "your wish is granted. You shall be my wife, and by the end of September you must bear me a son." Then he spoke to the sisters. "As for you, my little doves, you will be part of my household. The eldest will be my cook, and the other must weave and sew." So the 3 sisters went to the Tsar's court, and that very night he ordered a wedding feast, much to the chagrin and envy of the other 2 sisters. After the banquet, the Tsar and his bride were led to an ivory bed, and that very night she conceived a son. But the country was at war, and the Tsar had to leave his young wife. He said farewell and told her to take good care of herself, and then he rode off with his troops. He was still far away when her child was born. She watched over it like a she-eagle over her eaglet, and proud of this marvelous baby who at birth was already 3 feet tall, she at once sent a messenger to Tsar Saltan. But her sisters, the cook and the weaver, together with a marriage broker called Babarika, plotted to bring about her downfall. They arranged for the messenger to be followed and captured, and in his place they sent another, with the news that the queen had borne not a son or a daughter, nor even a mouse or a frog, but a monster. When the Tsar heard this, he was enraged and wanted to hang the courier, but he relented and sent back instructions that they must wait for his return before any decision should be taken about the child. So the courier rode home, but the 2 sisters, Babarika, waylaid him, filled him with drink until he was tipsy, and then put another message in his wallet. This said that the Tsar ordered his boyas, his noblemen, to throw his young wife and the child into the sea. Much grieved, the boyars came to her room and read out the decree. But since it was the Tsar's command, there was no help for it. The Tsarina and her infant son were put into a barrel, and the barrel was nailed up and cast off into the sea. Under the glittering stars and the wandering clouds, the barrel tossed on the sea, and the waves splashed over it. The Tsarina wept and struggled, and all the time, hour by hour, the baby grew. He called to one of the waves, "You are free and go wherever you want. You roll over the rocks, you flood the shores and bear the ships. Have mercy on us. Wash us on to the dry land." And the wave obeyed. Very gently the barrel was washed on the shore, and the mother and the baby were safe. But how were they going to get out of the barrel? The son rose to his feet and braced himself against a stave with his head. "How about breaking through this window?" he said. and he burst it, and he scrambled out. Both mother and son were free, but they were hungry. Up on a hill above the shore they saw an oak tree, and from this the son broke off a branch. He bent it into a bow and strung a silken cord across it. Then he took a twig and shaped it into an arrow and went back to the shore to look for game. As he reached the sea, he heard a cry and saw a swan struggling in the waves. A kite was hovering above her, and she, trying to escape, was thrashing the water with her wings. But the bird of prey had spread his talons and was poised to strike with his blood-stained beak. Then the young prince's arrow whistled through the air and struck the kite in the neck. It dropped bleeding into the sea, where the swan pecked at it and beat at it with her wings until it disappeared below the water. Then the swan spoke to the Tsarevich in Russian. "You have come to my rescue," she said. "Do not grieve that after this you will not eat for 3 days, nor that your arrow was lost in the sea. You will find that this does not matter, for I will repay you. It was not a swan that you saved, but a maiden, and the kite that you killed was a sorcerer. I shall serve you for the rest of your life. But now turn back, lie down, and go to sleep." The swan flew off, and in spite of their empty stomachs, the Tsarina and her son did as she said and slept. But when the Tsarevich woke next morning, he was astonished, for lying before him he saw a great city with battlemented walls, and behind them the domes of churches and monasteries. He woke his mother and told her that the swan must have been very busy. They walked towards the city, and as they went through the gateway they were greeted by a deafening peal of bells. People thronged all round them. There was the sound of singing. Courtiers appeared in golden coaches and welcomed them. And there and then the Tsarevich was crowned as the ruler of the country and began to reign that day under the title of Duke Gidon. Out at sea, a little ship was passing, and the ship's company clustered together and stared at the extraordinary sight. The island that they knew was now transformed. There was a golden-domed city above the shore, and a harbor from which they could hear the sound of cannon fire, a signal for them to drop anchor there. Duke Gidon himself greeted them as his guests, plied them with food and drink, and said, "You are merchants, I can see that. But what are you trading in, and where are you bound for?" And the sailors replied, "We have sailed all round the world, trading in furs, in sables, black and russet fox skins, and now that our business is finished, we are sailing due east to pass the island beyond, to the Tsardom of Tsar Saltan." Then Duke Gidon said, "A good passage to you, gentlemen, and greet Tsar Saltan for me." As the traders put out to sea, he watched them, grieving. The swan swam up and asked him what saddened him. "I am sick to see my father," said Duke Gidon. "Well then," said the swan, "if you would like to fly to sea after the ship, I will turn you into a gnat." And she beat her wings, churned up the water, and splashed him all over. Then he shrank to the size of a dot. He became a gnat, and he shrilled after the ship. There, dropping down onto the deck, he tucked himself into a crack. And so the ship, with a following wind, sailed merrily on past the island of beyond, to the land of Tsar Saltan. Once in the harbor, the merchants went ashore. The Tsar bade them be his guests, and Duke Gedan, the gnat, flew after them. He saw his father, Tsar Saltan, shining in gold, sitting on his throne in the chamber of state, with a sad expression on his face, and beside him were the cook and the weaver, Duke Gedan's aunts, together with the marriage broker, Babarika. The Tsar invited the merchants to sit at his table beside him and questioned them thus. "Now, gentlemen, tell me your news. Have you been journeying long? And what did you see beyond these shores? Did you come across any wonders?" To this the sailors replied, "We have traversed the whole world, and yes, we did see a wonderful sight. There is a craggy island. We knew it of old, and remembered it as bare and uninhabited with just a single oak tree growing on it. But now a new city stands there, with a palace and golden-domed churches, castles and gardens. Duke Gedan rules over it, and he sent you his greetings." The Tsar marveled and said, "If I live long enough, I shall visit this wonderful island." But the two sisters and Babarika tried to distract him. "A city by the sea," said the cook contemptuously, with a sly wink at the others. "I know something better than that. There is a spruce tree in a wood, and beneath it is a squirrel, and the squirrel sings to itself and keeps gnawing little nuts. But these nuts are no ordinary ones. They have golden shells, and the kernels are emeralds. This is what I call a marvel." The Tsar was impressed, but the gnat was full of anger, and he bit the cook in her right eye. She went pale and stiff, and then doubled up with pain, and her sister, together with Babarika and the other servants, chased the gnat with shrieks of fury, but he escaped through the window and flew back calmly to his own country. There once again, in his own shape, the Duke walked by the shore and stared out to sea, and as before the swan came swimming up. "Hail, Prince," she said. "Why are you so subdued and dejected?" "I am haunted by a story I have heard," he told her. "Somewhere there is a spruce tree in a wood, and beneath the tree there is a squirrel who sings and gnaws little nuts. But the nuts are not ordinary ones. The shells are golden, and they have emeralds inside. But maybe there's no truth in the tale." "Dear Prince," said the swan, "there's no need to grieve any longer. I am glad to be able to help you in this little matter." So with a lightened heart the Duke went home, and there in the big courtyard of his palace he saw a tall spruce, and under it a little squirrel gnawing at a golden nut and taking from it an emerald. He gathered up the shell, added it to a neat pile, and sang and whistled to the onlookers, "In the garden, in the orchard." The Duke was amazed. "What a swan! God give her the same joy as I have been given." Then he made a crystal enclosure for the squirrel and had it guarded, and appointed a clerk to keep a tally of the nuts, profit for the Duke and honor for the squirrel. Over the sea a little ship was running before the wind. As it passed the craggy island and the great city, cannons were fired from the pier commanding the vessel to put in. The merchants made their ship fast, and Duke Gedan welcomed them as his guests. After they had eaten, he asked them to give an account of themselves. "What are you trading in, and where are you bound for?" The sailors replied, "We have gone right around the world. We traded in horses, ponies from the lands of the Don, and now our business is finished, and we have a long haul home. past the island of beyond to the land of the great Saltan." "A good passage to you then, gentlemen," said the Duke, "and greet the Tsar for me." The merchants bowed to the Duke and went out and got under way. The Duke went back to the seashore. The swan was already there, and when she saw his look of sorrowful yearning, she once again splashed him with water. This time he was changed into a fly, and he flew off, and he dropped down onto the ship and crawled into a crack. The ship sped fast before the wind, past the island of beyond, until the coast of the Tsar of Saltan was sighted. When their vessel was safely berthed, the merchants went ashore, guests of the great Tsar himself, and behind them flew Duke Gedon in the form of a fly. He saw the gold-clad Tsar sitting in state on his throne, but looking sad and distracted. Near him sat the cook and the weaver and Babarika, staring like wicked toads. The Tsar put the merchants next to him at his table, and he questioned them. "Have you been at sea a long time? Where have you been? And how are things in the world at large? And have you seen any marvels?" And they replied, "We've been around the world. Life at sea is fair enough, but we can tell you of our marvel. There is an island with a city on it, with gold-topped churches and castles and gardens. In front of the palace there is a spruce tree, and beneath it is a crystal house. And in it lives a tame squirrel with extraordinary powers. He sings and gnaws nuts, not ordinary nuts, but gold ones, with emeralds inside. The army salutes him, and he has his own bodyguard, and a state clerk who keeps an account of the nuts. They mint coins out of the nutshells and put them in circulation all around the world. And girls store the emeralds in treasure houses. And everyone on this island is rich. There aren't any cottages, only mansions." The Tsar was awestruck. "If only I live long enough, I shall visit this island as Gedon's guest," he said. But the cook and the weaver and Babarika had no intention of letting him go there. And the weaver, smiling slyly, said, "Well, what's so wonderful, even if it's true, about a squirrel sweeping up gold and raking emeralds into piles? I can tell you something to beat that. Somewhere there's a place where a stormy sea surges up the shingle on an empty shore. A wave rolls up and 33 knights walk out in coats of mail glowing like fire. They are handsome, tall as giants and all alike, and with them comes old Chernomor, a wizard who appears in many Russian fairy tales. There's a real wonder for you." The Tsar marveled, but Gedon was enraged. He gave a buzz and landed on his aunt's left eye. She turned pale, gave a cry, and doubled up. Everybody round her gave chase and tried to swat the fly. But the Duke was off, through the window, and flew home across the sea. Again Gedon was walking by the shore and staring out to sea, and over the waves came the swan. "Are you grieved, fair prince?" she asked. "Why do you look so sad?" "I am eaten up by longing," he told her. "There is a marvelous thing that I want, for my own." "And what is that?" she said. "There is a lonely shore, beaten by stormy waves, where 33 heroes walk out from the waves. They are all identical, handsome young giants, and old Chernomor comes with them." "Is that all that troubles you, prince?" said the swan. "Think no more of it. These knights of the sea are all my own brothers. Do not fret any longer, but hurry back and wait for them." So the Duke went off, reassured. He climbed the tower and looked out to sea. Suddenly the waves mounted and heaved and rushed up on the shore, and 33 knights strode out in coats of mail glowing like fire. They marched in pairs, and the silver-haired Chernamor led them to the city. Duke Gadon hurried down from the tower and went to greet them, and their leader said, "The Swan has sent us to you, to guard your famous city. We shall come out of the sea every day, without fail, to patrol your walls. But now we must go back. We find the air of the earth stifling." Once more, a little ship was being driven over the sea by the wind. It approached the craggy island, and cannons summoned it into the harbor. The sailors made it fast, and Duke Gadon invited them to be his guests. After they had eaten and drunk, he questioned them. "Well, my friends, what was your cargo, and where are you bound for?" "We have sailed round the world," the merchants told him, "trading in Damascus, steel, silver, and gold. Now all that is over, and we are on our way home, past the island of Buyon, to the Tsardom of Saltan." And the Duke wished them Godspeed, and sent his greetings to the Tsar. The merchants bowed and left, and the Duke followed them down to the shore. The Swan was already there, and when she saw his yearning face, she splashed him once more with water. Instantly he shrank and turned, this time, into a bee. He overtook the ship, and dropping down onto the stern, found a crack to hide in. The wind drove the ship on, past the island of Buyan, and the shores of the Tsardom came in sight. Saltan invited the merchants to the palace, and behind them flew the bee. He saw the Tsar on his throne, wearing his crown, and saw the sadness of his face. The cook and the weaver, and Babarika, were near, eyeing him, but now there were only 4 eyes among the 3 of them. The Tsar placed the merchants near him at his table, and questioned them about their trade and what they had seen. Had they encountered any wonder, he asked. The merchants replied that there was one great wonder. "It is on an island where a city stands. Daily the sea boils up, surges up the empty shore, breaks splashing on it, and leaves there 33 knights in golden armor, tall, handsome young men. Old Chernamor comes out to the sea with them and marches them in pairs to guard the island. There is no guard that is braver or more reliable. Duke Gadon rules over this island, and he sends you his greetings." Tsar Saltan was deeply impressed. "One day, if I live, I shall visit this island." But Babarika scoffed.
"What's so extraordinary about all this? Men coming out of the sea to keep watch. Whether it's true or a lie, there's nothing very strange in that. It is something that puts it in the shade. Beyond the sea there is a princess who outshines all other mortals. By day she dims the sun, by night lights up the earth. The moon gleams under her hair, and her brow glows a star. She is splendid to look at, clad in peacock colors, and when she speaks it is like a brook murmuring. You can say with justice that this is a marvel."
The merchants were silent, not wishing to argue with the woman, and the Tsar marveled, but Duke Gadon, though he was angry, did not want to injure Babarika's eyes, so he buzzed over to the old woman and stung her nose. A lump swelled up at once, and again there was consternation among the onlookers.
"Help! The Nazi! Catch him! Swat him! We'll show you! Hold on!"
But the bee was already through the window and on his way to his own land. The Duke went back to the shore, and the white swan came swimming towards him.
"What ails you, Prince?"
she asked as usual.
"Why do you look so downcast?"
"I am consumed with sadness," he told her. "People marry. Only I am left."
"But have you anyone in view?" she asked.
"They say," said the Duke, "that there is a princess who holds the eyes of all who see her. By day she dims the sun. By night she lights up the earth. The moon shines in her hair, and a star gleams on her forehead. She is splendid as a peacock to look at, and she speaks as sweetly and softly as a brook. Do you think all this is true?" The swan was silent, and then said,
"Yes, there is such a maiden. But a wife is not like a glove. You can't just shake her off your hand or tuck her behind your belt. Give it all some thought so that you don't have regrets afterwards. This is my advice."
The Duke started protesting. It was time for him to get married, and he had thought about it for a long time. He was ready, heart and soul, and he would walk through 3 times 9 lands to reach his princess. The swan sighed and said,
"Why should you go so far? Your destiny is much nearer. I myself am this princess."
Then, beating her wings, she flew up from the waves, and lighting on the shore among some bushes, turned into a princess. The moon was shining in her hair, and a star on her forehead. She bore herself nobly, and when she spoke, it was like a brook murmuring. The Duke embraced her, led her to his mother, and said, "Gracious mother, I have chosen a wife for myself and an obedient daughter for you. We both ask your consent. Bless your children, that they may live in harmony and love."
"God will reward you, my children,"
said the mother, with tears in her eyes. So without delay, the Duke and the Princess Swan were married and settled down and awaited a child. On the sea, a little ship was running before the wind with bellying sails. As it passed the steep island crowned with a city, cannons fired from the pier signaled the ship to come in. It berthed, and Duke Gadon called the merchants up to the palace to be his guests. When they had eaten and drunk, he asked them about their voyage. They told him that they had traded successfully, and that now, after much wandering, were on their way home to the land of Tsar Saltan. Then the Duke said, "I wish you well, gentlemen, on the last lap of your voyage." On the last lap of your journey. And remind your sovereign that he has always promised me a visit, but so far has never come. Greet him for me. The merchants departed, but this time Duke Gadon stayed at home with his wife. The wind was fair, and the little ship sped before it, and the familiar coasts of Tsar Saltan's land came in sight. The merchants went ashore and were invited up to the palace. There they found the Tsar sitting, watched by the cook, the weaver, and Babarika. 4 eyes among the 3 of them, and one with a lump on her nose. He asked the merchants about their voyage, and whether they had seen anything of particular note. Then they told him about the marvelous island with its city and gold-topped buildings, about the spruce tree under which a squirrel in a crystal house was forever gnawing at golden nuts with emeralds inside, about the 33 knights headed by old Jernamor, who daily came out to the sea to patrol the city.
"And," they ended, "the Duke has a young wife,
and we could not take our eyes off her. She outshines the sun by day, and lights up the earth at night. The moon seems to shine in her hair, and there is a star on her brow. Duke Gidon rules that city, and everyone sings his praise. He sent you greetings, but laments that you have never paid him the visit you have promised.
Then the Tsar could bear no more, and commanded that his fleet should be made ready. The two sisters, the cook and the weaver, and Babarika, the marriage broker, tried to stop him, but this time the Tsar wouldn't listen.
"I am not a child,"
he said furiously, stamping his foot, and went out, slamming the door. Duke Gidon sat by the window, staring out at the sea. It was very calm and still. Then over the horizon ships became visible. Tsar Saltan's fleet. The Duke stood up and shouted for his mother and his young wife. "Look," he cried, "my father is coming." The fleet was nearing the island, and as the Duke put his glass to his eye, he could see the Tsar on deck doing the same, and beside him stood the cook and the weaver and Babarika, all of them astonished at this new country. On the land they started firing cannons, ringing the bells, and the Duke put off in a boat to welcome the Tsar, the cook and the weaver, and Babarika. Then once on shore again he led the Tsar to the palace. They went through the gleaming gates towards the state apartments. Outside stood the Tsar's bodyguard, 33 handsome knights, all alike, and old Chernomor with them. And there in the courtyard below a spruce, a squirrel was singing a little song as he nibbled at a golden nut, took out an emerald, and dropped it into a bag, the yard being strewn with golden shells. And look, the Duke's young wife, with the moon in her hair and a star on her brow, striding out stately as a peacock and leading her mother-in-law. The Tsar gazed, and his heart leapt. "What do I see? Who is this?" And he wept, and he took the queen, his own dear wife, into his arms, then embraced his son and his daughter-in-law. Then there was a great feast. But the two sisters, the cook and the weaver, and Babarika, fled, and it was some time before they could be found. They confessed what they had done and admitted their guilt. But the Tsar was so happy that he forgave them and sent them home, and the day went by with much feasting and drinking. The Tsar had to be carried to bed at the end of it. I was there, but the beer and the mead only wetted my whiskers.